So we're going to start with ginger. That's ginger. You found it. Good job.
This is plant
identification right here on the field.
Yeah, no, I was just really excited about ginger.
So ginger is a really good herb to start out with when you're learning herbalism because there are so many different things you can do with it, and it's so extraordinarily useful.
And it's also, just to cut you off there for a minute,
absolutely.
It's also really ubiquitous. It's not too weird. People won't look at you funny if you're like, I'm trying out ginger. It's very easy to come across. Most places you can get it at the grocery store. Mm-hmm. So it's a really friendly place to start if you are starting out with herbs, or if you're not starting with herbs but your friends are and you would like to be maybe experimenting a little with your friends, then ginger is a good place to start with your friends.
Yeah. So when we think about plants, we think about various qualities that they have, and tonight we're going to be touching primarily on some warming herbs and also on some herbs that are moistening. And we're going to talk a little bit about the difference between them on that level. So when we look at ginger, we find an herb that's heating and it's drying in nature, and it helps us to relax. It relieves tension. So those are like our three primary axes that we're going to be looking at with each plant. Is it moistening or drying? Is it warming or cooling? And is it tonifying, tightening, or is it relaxing? And so again, with ginger, we get warming, drying, relaxing. The warming aspect is probably the most noticeable, most obvious one. When you taste ginger, you can feel that in your mouth, you can feel it on your tongue, you can observe the effects of it, and they all kind of get categorized as warm. You see redness, you see blood movement, you see stimulation, you see activation. So those are all on the hot side of our spectrum there. And so this is a good kind of a signature plant for that quality as well. So when we look at herbs in terms of qualities, one of the first places we investigate for finding them or for discovering them is with the taste and the flavor of the plant. So with ginger, we get something that's, we describe it as being pungent and aromatic. And again, that pungency is something that you can taste with ginger when you bite a little piece of it and you feel that warmth in your mouth and on your tongue, and that kind of feeling of stimulation and heat and fire and activity. And
pungent is actually worth talking about just a little bit. Pungent is one that sometimes people have a little trouble identifying. So bitter is pretty easy to identify, and spicy, which is really another way of saying warming, is pretty easy to identify, but pungent kind of gets people sometimes because it's not a word that we use a lot in our just regular old everyday language. But ginger is a really excellent example of pungency because you definitely taste the spicy, but there's also something that almost is akin to garlic in there. Mm-hmm. Sort of, I feel like the best way to describe pungency is with comparisons. So the part that is spicy is often the part that we identify ginger with, but then there's that other flavor under there that a little bit earthy, a little garlicky, not all the way to garlic breath garlicky, but just a little, feeling like, geez, are these related? They're not, but it's interesting to feel that flavor. Calamus, which is an herb we'll talk about later on, is another one that has that pungency. And in fact, calamus was often historically used as a substitute for ginger here in the States for people who came from Europe and couldn't get ginger just at the moment.
Yeah. With fresh ginger, you can also detect the aromatic elements of its flavor and its scent. And if you just, like I did, just chop up a piece of ginger rhizome and smell it, then it has this very nice kind of light, upward moving sort of scent. And with aromatics, the feeling that I often get from them is that something is sort of like bubbling up through the top of your mouth and into your brain and up out of the top of your head. It's a rising kind of a feeling. So with ginger you get that, and that's most notable in fresh ginger. That particular quality kind of breaks down or is reduced as it dries. There are some chemical changes that happen in the constituents of ginger as it dries, and they change its qualities a little bit. In your notes about the plant, in the little Materia Medica entry that we wrote up for you, you'll notice that we differentiate between fresh ginger and dried. And the major way is that the fresh ginger has more of what we call a dispersive action. It stirs up circulation, moves it out to the periphery of the body and up to the surface of the body, up to the skin layer. So that's a dispersive action, and you get more of that with fresh ginger. As ginger dries, its constituents change and it sort of condenses, and its action tends to be more centrally warming, so that heat kind of stays in the GI tract rather than circulating out and spinning out to the periphery. So you might choose to differentiate the form or the preparation of ginger that you work with based on that aspect of it. So for instance, if I was using ginger in a diaphoretic tea to try to manage a fever, to raise heat in the body but also to get it moving and circulate it through, then I would want to use fresh ginger for that. If I was really just focused though on somebody who had like a cold, stagnant, kind of a sluggish digestive state, they ate food but it was really slow in moving through and it got all kind of backed up, then I might prefer dried ginger for that, as that's going to direct more of that heat into the core, warm up the GI tract and get things kind of stirred up through there again. So it's a little...
That said, for the first of many times, I'm going to say something just a little contradictory. And so it's a good time to say or to remind you that not all herbalists agree about everything, and that doesn't mean that either one of them is necessarily wrong, right? Because of course we all have different bodies and we all have a little bit different experience of the plants that we're working with. Just like you may have a friend and you have certain experiences with that friend, but other people have different experiences with that friend. And so it doesn't mean that necessarily any of you are right or wrong, it's just a reflection of those experiences. So I was gonna add that I find that if we're making tea with ginger, I find the dried ginger to produce a much stronger ginger flavor in the tea, and the fresh ginger to be a much lighter flavor. So when I'm working with ginger as tea, even if I want to have that diffusive action, I'm personally inclined to still reach for the dried ginger just because it'll be a stronger flavor in the tea, and that's very appealing to me. Of course, having said that, I do also need to say that I do tend towards a little sluggishness in the gut. So even if I'm trying to get movement out to the periphery, that's grounded in the reality in my body that my gut is a little sluggish. So it may be that it's that dried action that is moving things in my gut that allows the stimulation to move out to other places.
Yeah. So, by the way, we've been talking about ginger already, you're already getting the sense that a lot of its action is centered in the digestive system, and that it has some effects on the circulatory system. The other major area in the body, or the other major organ affinity that we look at with this particular herb is for the reproductive system. And that's most famous in female bodies, where ginger is known as an emmenagogue, which is to say it can help to bring on a sluggish period or one that's kind of stalled. The thing is that with emmenagogues, there are many different underlying actions that can cause that as an observed effect. And so when you see that an herb is listed as being an emmenagogue, then you need to get more information about it. You want to say, well, how does it accomplish that? There are some plants that do that by stimulating contractions of the uterine muscle. There are some that do that by relaxing tension that might have been present there. There are some that direct more blood to the area. There's a number of different ways by which that could be accomplished. In the case of ginger, it's primarily through storing up blood circulation down here in the pelvic floor. And by moving that warmth around, you also cause a release of tension. So it's that kind of pair of effects is what ginger does to enable more blood flow.
A lot of people get very concerned when they see that an herb is listed as an emmenagogue, and so immediately they think, oh, a pregnant person can't work with this plant. And you may even see lists on the internet that say, no, it's not safe to have ginger, but of course, that's really unreasonable. If you stop and think about it a minute, ginger is a food plant, and even if you think about in Asia, it's a base for almost every recipe in Asia. And we can't imagine that every woman in Asia, when she gets pregnant, modifies every single recipe, that comes famously from that area. So we need to think again about a little bit more rationally and a little more critically about whether or not certain plants are safe or unsafe in pregnancy. Ginger actually is not only safe in pregnancy, but desirable in pregnancy. So remember, it's not stimulating a menstrual flow in any kind of way that is abortifacient. In fact, really there are very few herbs that will do that. There are very few herbs that will do that. But ginger is moving blood to the area, right? Moving blood into the pelvic area. Blood flow means nutrition. And if you're pregnant, you want the food flowing to your uterus so that you will feed that baby and build a good, strong baby who's well nourished. So actually, ginger is a great idea in pregnancy. Not to mention that it also is one of our best anti-nausea plants.
Yeah.
And even if all you can manage is some candied ginger, even if you really can't handle anything, you can't keep anything down at all, a way that I really like to do it is get a little ginger tincture and put barely even a drop right on your tongue, but you don't have to swallow it. Just one drop of ginger tincture, it'll mostly evaporate. But that ginger has such a quick action to relax the nausea that's really wonderful and such an ally for morning sickness.
Yeah, so ginger's effects on nausea, they extend to all different types of nausea. So nausea from morning sickness, nausea from seasickness, which is like happening up here in the inner ear and in the balance centers in the brain. Nausea from I ate bad food, nausea from I ate food that was not really food for me, nausea from I had too much alcohol last night. It's good for all kinds of things like that. So we seem to find that its effects are happening both at the level of the stomach and the digestive system itself, but also there seems to be some effect on the higher regulatory centers in the brain where it calms down that sense of like, hey, we better throw up now because something weird is going on in here. And so that makes it a really useful ally. So that term we would call it an antiemetic sometimes, if we want to get fancy about it. And you'll see that attached to a number of other plants like pear and peach leaf and more famously peppermint. But ginger is definitely a good plant to know for that purpose. And this does extend even up into nausea induced by chemotherapy. So again, you don't need enormous doses of ginger for that to happen. A few drops of tincture. Or
you could take a slice of the rhizome and hold it on your tongue but not swallow it. Again, with nausea, the actual consuming of anything can be a real issue. So you don't have to actually swallow any of it. You can hold it right on your tongue and then spit it back out, when you're done with it.
Yeah.
Although I want to break in here for one of my favorite ways to work with ginger, because we've sort of got all the pieces now for me to draw together to share that. Ginger is antispasmodic, right? So it relaxes tension in the body. And I find I'm a very type A kind of person. I tend to get wound up about things. And at night sometimes it can be really tough for me to wind down and get ready for bed. Especially if it's a night where maybe I was teaching late and I've had dinner quite late in the evening, and that's just never a good scene for me. Pretty much guarantees that it's going to be hard for me to fall asleep. Also, if I have eaten in a rush or if I'm very tense, either one of those things can lead to a headache for me. So ginger is a wonderful nighttime ally. You won't find anybody listing ginger as a plant that will help you fall asleep. That's just not in its realm. But for me, that is absolutely what happens. And it's that antispasmodic action. It's the warming in the gut, the relaxing in the gut, the relaxing throughout the head even, and just sort of warming everything up and just letting everything relax a little bit. That is really excellent for me. And if you really want the 1-2 punch, I pair it with chamomile, which we'll be talking about later. And the two of those together, a nice cup or two of that as I'm turning out some lights and turning off my computer and just maybe doing some quiet journaling or knitting or something to kind of get myself into the flow of the idea of sleep. That is just super, super effective for me. Especially if any kind of gut upset or headache is impeding my being able to relax.
Yeah, the use for headaches. With headaches, you have to kind of differentiate from type to type or from person to person. Ginger is helpful when the headache is of a cold type or a constriction type. So if you just actually feel tension in the head itself or around the neck, then you might drink some ginger, or you could apply some topically because it does have a useful topical relaxant warming effect. So you could use it for that kind. Or if it's cold, by that it'd be like somebody has a pale face and they're pain is kind of dull and throbbing and distributed, in that case you might try a little bit of ginger to warm them up and to stimulate circulation and to move that around. In that case, a good pairing for ginger would be rosemary, because rosemary really has an upward movement, and it would carry the ginger upwards with it into the head and get that effect for you. So for those types of headaches, ginger can be really helpful. You will see reference to ginger in maybe some more modern applications where people are looking at it to try to calm down or to reduce systemic inflammatory conditions. Because systemic inflammation is at the root of a number of major chronic health problems that are really prevalent in people today. So ginger, and perhaps even more famously ginger's cousin, turmeric, have been of interest for reducing systemic inflammatory states in the body. And you can talk about the inhibition of cyclooxygenase and like the whole thing, and that's quite interesting. But for those applications, the doses of ginger tend to be higher. They're getting into the gram or 3-6 grams of ginger over the course of the day, which might sound like quite a lot. And if we were to kind of weigh and measure it out, it would probably look like a lot just to take all at once. But if you disperse it in some ginger tea over here, and some ginger in this food, and ginger in your dinner, and you kind of spread it out that way, it's actually completely manageable.
Well, if you just think about going out for sushi, and the pile of ginger slices that they put there, hopefully not dyed pink, and then you're like, wait, but I wish that there was more ginger here, like that. Just one sushi dinner, you could easily get that many grams.
Yeah, so that's a reminder to all of us not to restrict our herbalism to tea and tincture, but to think about if I make food and I spice it like I mean it, then that counts as one of my doses of my herbs for the day. So never neglect your kitchen as a good source of herbal medicine. Yeah, okay. Let's see, what haven't we said yet? All right, so a couple of cautions here on ginger. It is possible, if you were getting up into those higher dose ranges over the course of your day, to get a notable blood thinning effect from ginger. Generally, if you're just taking a few squirts of tincture through the course of your day to stimulate digestive activity, or if you were drinking a couple of cups of ginger tea a day, you're not going to notice this as
or having a regular dinner amount, a regular cooking amount.
Of course. Then that won't be a problem. But if somebody was really pushing ginger and really trying to get all that systemic anti-inflammatory effect from it, then they're going to cross over at some point and they're going to start to see some blood thinning. Again, normally that's not a big problem, and in some cases that's even ideal. That could be a better alternative than some of the medications people might be pushed towards. Instead, the main place where you would actually worry about that is if you had surgery scheduled in a week. At that point, you need to cut it down. You need to back off of the ginger and the garlic and a whole bunch of other plants for that matter. This is not uncommon. But you do that, get your surgery, heal up, you'll be all right. So
another factor in here where we might want to just sort of play with it is if you tend to have a very heavy period flow, then ginger might not be your favorite thing. Ginger's so great when you're having your period, especially if you're all crampy and cold and the kidneys hurt and sort of all that stuff. But if you're bleeding very heavily or uncomfortably heavily, then you may find that ginger stimulates that somewhat. You'll need to experiment in your body. It's not necessarily dangerous. It may just be uncomfortable. And if it is, I might suggest sage as an alternative in that case.
Yeah. Yeah, and you know what? One other thing I guess about ginger that we didn't really talk about that we often turn to it for is as a flavor. The fancy word is corrigant, right? To make your formula taste better or taste more appealing to people. Ginger has a strong, obvious, and familiar flavor, and so that makes it quite useful for this. We have a lot of people, we come in, we mix a formula together, and it's going to probably taste like wood and bark and licking moss and whatever else, but we put a bit of ginger in there and that becomes the dominant flavor, and they're like, yeah, okay, it's just a sort of cup of slightly weird ginger tea, no problem. That said, people do have strong responses to this flavor, and some of them are negative, so you need to ask somebody before you just throw that into their blend, because they might say, ginger, and we can all look at them like, really?
Well, my daughter is one of those, and she will let you know it. Yeah. But for her, she'd prefer peppermint, which is another one of those plants that we turn to as a strong flavor to cover up some bitterness or something that maybe people aren't very excited about. So you might find that people either really love ginger or they don't love it so much. Those people might like peppermint. I'm not certain that my daughter doesn't love peppermint and hate ginger because I love ginger and hate peppermint. But you know, that's how those things go with teenagers.
Yeah. So for you personally, whether you love it or hate it, ginger is important. You want to know about it. And again, it's one of those ubiquitous things. You can pretty much stop wherever you are, turn in a circle, and you'll probably find some ginger around you. So that's really an important plant to learn about and get fluency with because there's so much you can do and it's so easy to come across.
Even here in New England, it's starting to become really popular to grow our own ginger. We do need greenhouses to do that or to grow them indoors, but it's totally possible and it is also so delicious. So whether you're in New England or anywhere else, if you have even a remotely green thumb, I would definitely recommend trying to grow some ginger because it's really great.
Yeah, and one thing we've been doing the last couple of years is there's at our farmers market, they always, at least once a year, they have Fresh Ginger Day, and you have to sign up in advance, and you can get the fresh baby ginger from...
Old Friends Farm is
Old
where we
Friends.
get most of it.
Yeah.
Red Fire Farm grows it too.
Sure, and so, you know, we go and get our bag of it, and it's like a couple pounds, and it's great. And so we'll cook with a bunch, and we'll tincture a bunch, and we'll do whatever, but we also take some of it, set it aside, and we're going to chop that up, and we're going to put it in a jar and pour honey all over it. And let that infuse for a while. And at the end, like a month,
Yeah.
right? And we're gonna have both ginger infused honey with all of those aromatics and warming pungent resins and everything kind of coming out into there. But we're also gonna have homemade candied ginger,
Yeah.
and it's just so good.
It's so good.
So that's a really good way to take your medicine.
We didn't say anything about respiratory health and ginger, and that's really silly. But ginger is actually fantastic for the respiratory system, and we teach pharmacy students here, and a lot of them are foreign students who are here studying, and the Asian students will say that ginger, what they really associate it with is a cough. If they get a cough, then immediately they start with ginger. Today I was talking with a friend of mine from Korea, and she was saying that all winter long she makes this great decoction of ginger, cinnamon, and taechu, which is Korean dates. So now I can't wait to go to H Mart and get some Korean dates and try that. But she says, I drink this all winter long and I never get sick. And I really feel that there's a lot to that. So one of my favorite ways to work with ginger when I feel a cold coming on is to, I actually do this ahead of time. At the beginning of, right before the cold and flu season, whatever, I will chop up a bunch of ginger and a bunch of garlic and put them together in a jar with about half honey and half vinegar. And then just let that hang out for a little while. Over time, the garlic may turn some funny colors like greenish blue. That's not a problem. It's just the copper content that's actually desirable. Eventually, it'll get sort of brown, also good. But in the end, what you've got is sweet pickled garlic and ginger. And that is a really delicious way and really effective way to get these two helpers into your system to fight against cold and flu. But also definitely whenever I have sort of a respiratory thing, ginger is bringing heat and warmth into the lungs, which a respiratory cold, like we call it a cold. And we might not think of that as synonymous with feeling cold or feeling chilly, but it actually is. That's why we call it a cold, is because the temperature in your lungs is lower than it normally would be. And that's part of why you have a cold. Those respiratory pathogens don't want to live at the normal temperature of our lungs, but when our immune system is down, when we're tired, when we're depleted, then our body temperature drops a bit, and then those respiratory pathogens are really able to survive. Well, so one of the factors for ginger with a cough and a cold is that it's just literally warming up the whole chest area. And the other factor is that antispasmodic action. So any of the herbal antispasmodics or the herbs that we associate with using for cough suppression, which isn't quite the right word, to suppress the spasm of a cough is not the same thing as to suppress your body's ability to expectorate. So working with ginger can help to stop that hacking, spasmy cough that doesn't get anything out of your lungs, but does make you really exhausted on all your muscles in between your ribs hurt. But it doesn't force your body to not cough when you do have something to spit up. So we want the body to still be able to cough up the phlegm, which is not super appealing, but is super wonderful from the perspective of your immune system, because that is just a little package of pathogen cells that your immune system has like packaged up ready for the trash and is throwing out of your body literally as you cough it up and spit it out. So ginger, yeah, excellent for colds and flu. If there's a fever involved, again, helping to bring that healthy warmth in and then let it release.
Yeah, and again for that you can work with probably any form of ginger that you like. A good strong ginger tea is a really good way to go there. Some dried ginger, cut and sifted into bits like that is going to work out great. Or if you have your own ginger you just buy at the grocery store that day, that's awesome as well. Get a grater and just grate it up and use like 2 or 3 tablespoons of that into a quart of water, boiling hot. Pour it on there, let it infuse. You'll get a strong tea out of that, and drink it down as hot as you can stand it for this application, and that'll work rapidly. So
it can also really be effective in clearing the sinuses, especially if you don't love horseradish or one of the stronger sinus clearing hot spicy plants. Grating up a bunch of ginger, that will definitely do it.
Yeah. And likewise, if you need to bring on a fever, if you really want to make a good strong fever present itself, that might sound a little counterintuitive if this is your first foray into holistic health, but oftentimes we do want to boost a fever. We want to build heat in the body, because that's our main offense really against the pathogen, is making the internal environment so hot that it's uncomfortable or impossible for the virus to replicate, and then we can put a stop to it. It also bumps up the activity of your own immune system in the mucosal immunity there. So all the way around, raising fever is a great way to fight off a pathogen, and using ginger is a great way to raise fever. At other times, we'll talk about herbs that we might use when we need to dissipate a fever, when we need to release that heat. In fact, one's coming right up, so we'll go to that soon.